Despite a long and shaky production cycle, the Loud House movie would be a big success and a major milestone for the series. It was only a matter of time before Nickelodeon would order another film. What kind of big adventure should we take the family on next? Free from the shackles of an external contract or unstable leadership, the staff could connect it back to the main show and develop the movie alongside it, now with a clear vision going in. They'd already been kicking around the idea of making a sequel to Pop Pop the Question, giving Albert and Myrtle a big destination wedding. And with Myrtle's secret agent background being well established, and the David Steele sensation in full swing, an all-out spy thriller was the clear choice. In the words of Kyle Marshall, it all came naturally. One thing that sets the two movies apart is their use of color. The first movie stuck to a nice cool feeling of blues, greens, and grays, creating a more cozy and whimsical aura, which fit nicely for a character introspective set in Scotland. This one instead goes for a lot of striking colors to emanate heat, with a lot of purples, reds, oranges, and yellows, perfect for a high-octane spy thriller. It even utilized the orange filter that you see in a lot of Western-focused media to accentuate that temperature, a trick that was also used in Dull Day Afternoon last season. Alongside that, some of the fancy visual effects from last time are absent, such as the panning and depth of field, sticking more closely to the main show's visual style, but with the added details and fancy lighting that a bigger budget brings, which makes it look a little more like a TV movie, but that's not a bad thing. The first movie's visuals were more experimental and cinematic, while this one sticks closer to the tried and true. Now, being the spy thriller that it is, the James Bond films serve as the primary inspiration. It's in the name after all, being a reference to No Time to Die, which released just a few years before this one did. And the film is absolutely peppered with Bond references. The quote from Boris Grishenko, the Thunderball Resort, the plot point about a spy coming out of retirement. Even the intro goes all-out Bond parody with music to match, letting you know just what you're in for this time around. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes, I wanted to address a common misconception about the previous film in relation to this one that affects how both are looked at in retrospect. You'll commonly hear the opinion that, oh, the Loud House movie was outsourced, they don't care about the source material, but with No Time to Spy, these people know Loud House. This is incorrect. Only the animation from the first movie was outsourced. Everything else was done in-house at Nickelodeon Movies. Rubiner still served as executive producer, and Kevin Sullivan was lead writer, both of whom have been with the show since the beginning. Doug Rockwell even wrote a couple of songs for the soundtrack, one of the artists responsible for the show's original score, such as what we saw in Really Loud Music, alongside the show's iconic theme song. Comparatively, more of the main show staff did work on No Time to Spy. After all, they spent 12 production slots on it. But the first movie was still very much made by people who know and love the show, and have done so for a long time. Something these two movies have in common, however, is their flashback openings. Jumping 37 years into the past, we get this establishing shot of the Paramount Mountain. Myrtle, known back then as Agent 28, is out on a dangerous mission to stop the villain Rufus Dufu, fighting her way into his lair. After a brief scuffle, she is captured by Ham Hand, a former professional wrestler turned minion, and Dufu reveals his plan. Launch a rocket equipped with lasers that will take out every communications satellite in the world, then replace them with his own to achieve world domination. While he starts the rocket's countdown, Myrtle breaks free and has a scuffle with him, resulting in Dufu slipping on a puddle of his own coffee and falling inside the rocket. Wanting to capture and not kill, Myrtle desperately tries to deactivate the rocket and stops the lasers but not the launch, resulting in Dufu's departure and demise. Disappointed, Myrtle has no choice but to radio in the failure to her boss. Don't worry, Myrtle, it's not like your family would go to repeat history or something. Rocketing back to the present day, we see that Lincoln is telling this story to Clyde, who's amazed at just how cool Myrtle is. He also reveals that Pop Pop and Myrtle are getting married, and are having their wedding on a vibrant tropical island. It's never stated exactly where this island is, but given that the population largely speaks English, it's probably in the Caribbean somewhere. Or maybe the Pacific, given the occasional tiki decorations. We get the usual frenzy of the family preparing for the trip, after which Lisa assigns Mr. Grouse to watch over the place while they're gone. The happy couple arrives, and Myrtle gives Lincoln an important secret mission: to guard the wedding rings. Hoping to have cool spy adventures with his grand, this greatly disappoints him. And this is where the movie makes its first mistake when it comes to characterization. His excitement is a downright obsession in the movie's first act, but him being this unfocused and irresponsible largely comes out of nowhere. Myrtle's a secret agent, which most kids would find cool, and I could understand if Myrtle had just told him and he was in the initial shock. The issue is in the timing. Not only is this a Lincoln who is supposed to be way more responsible than he used to be, but the fact that Myrtle is a retired spy isn't exactly breaking news to him. Quite a few episodes have passed since Pop the Question, and he's likely spent a lot of time with Myrtle since then. Why would this wedding trip specifically be the time to play spy? But one small change could easily fix this. Have some of these stories she told him take place on the island that the family is about to go to. Now that he finally gets to see it for himself, Lincoln would view it as this legendary location full of possible adventures, and would give him much more of a reason to lose focus and be blinded by excitement. Regardless, when Lincoln is packing his bag, he clearly prioritizes a David Steele watch over the rings, which serves as a good establishing shot to start his arc throughout the movie. Before long, the Louds are on a plane bound for paradise. Most of the siblings decide to be a public embarrassment, pissing off the rest of the plane. A random tourist named Fifi decides to strike up an awkward conversation with Lynn Sr., calling the Loud children adorable. It is promptly ended by his plane sickness, and we're prompted to a montage of more embarrassing behavior. Pop and Myrtle discuss couples activities that they want to do when they reach the island, and after Pop sick, Lincoln appears before Myrtle with that spy obsession in full force, which included checking all of the doors on the airplane and throwing bogus suspicion at an airline hostess. Myrtle shows understandable concern in response to his antics and decides to be forward with him. The spy lifestyle isn't fun or flashy like you see in the movies or comics. There's dangerous consequences. It all must be taken seriously. But being a kid, she doesn't expect him to get it. But his disappointment prompts her to cheer him up with more spy stories, something that disheartens Pop when he overhears it on the way back to his seat. We'll revisit this last part much later, so be sure to put a pin in it. Regardless, she tries repeatedly to get Lincoln to focus on his real mission, the wedding preparations, which Lincoln either ignores or seems rather put out about. In fact, she repeatedly asks him to cut the antics and focus on the vacation throughout the first act. I get he's a little disappointed, but this just isn't like him. We're then treated to a slapstick gag with Fifi involving lemons, which transitions into this funny Gilligan cut to get us on the island proper. And I have to say, I love the setting. I'm an absolute sucker for these kind of locales. Warmth, colors, the laid-back and verdant atmosphere. This shot of the sun through the palm trees really puts you in that vacation mood. And oh man, just look at these parrots. Look at that vibrant plumage. You think they can talk like Sergio can? And to cap it all off, we get to see the family pull into a fancy resort. The Thunderball Resort has this interesting mix of upscale and retro, with rooms that evoke that 50s lounge aesthetic, while the beachfront goes all-out cabana, and yet despite this mishmash of styles, it all just works. So, who put this fine establishment together? It's Flip. Actually, it's Flop Filippini. Flip's his cousin. What are the chances? He does have the eyebrow color Flip used to have, but otherwise he's identical to his cousin, albeit with a slightly more upscale feel. He's got the same gimmick of running multiple side hustles under different names, including the police force, but drives a limo instead of a crappy van. He's got his own animal sidekick as well, a crab named Ceviche, who's named after a fancy dish instead of gas station slop, and has a more refined and gentlemanly personality that contrasts Nacho's gross scrappiness. Flop even has his own specialty frozen drink, which are served via bar mixers at a fancy restaurant, and these things are handcrafted with the works. So it's clear that the writers wanted to have Flip in the movie, but couldn't figure out how to write him into the scenario in a way that felt natural, so they came up with an identical cousin. Though I do think they could have done a little more to set him apart appearance and personality-wise, so that he doesn't feel like a clone. Lean into that fanciness a little more. Pokemon Sun and Moon did a good job with this with Samson Oak, Professor Oak's Alolan cousin, who has a more distinctive appearance and still felt like his own character, while still retaining what makes his cousin recognizable. So now the group starts to split off. Rita and the sisters go to plan the bachelorette party, Lynn goes to meet with the caterer to prepare the menu, and our married couple-to-be get ready for their surprise fishing trip, which Lincoln awkwardly inserts himself into. Like, I get that he had nothing else to do, but the awkwardness in their tones really says it all, especially when he follows it up with, "I'll go get my spy stuff." However, he does run into a rather shady-looking brute with a mohawk, who relays some information that makes Lincoln suspicious. We then cut to the fishing trip proper. Pop-Pop and Myrtle are enjoying drinks on the bow, and urge Lincoln to let go of his investigation and join them. He ends up spotting some kind of operation going on back at the shoreline, being run by the same guy with the mohawk, and starts to take pictures. Mohawk catches wind of this and sends some goons out to assault the boat. Right as Pop-Up hooks something big, Lincoln pulls Myrtle away to explain the situation, and as she calls out Lincoln for his paranoia, the goons storm the ship. Confirmation that there really is a villain operating on the island. A fight quickly breaks out as the goons try to recover the camera, but the spy scuffle results in it plunging into the ocean. The battle has been won, for now, with Pop-Pop being completely unaware of what has just transpired. Though I can imagine he'd feel even worse if he did know. But at least he got to deal the final blow with the rock he hooked. On a side note, this scene was also responsible for this reaction image that was making the rounds for a little while. Anyway, as the sun sets, Pop-Pop laments his failure, but promises to make it up to Myrtle by taking her to a fancy seafood dinner. Myrtle brings Lincoln into a nearby tent and sternly informs him that he and his family need to leave the island, despite his protests. Furthermore, she contacts X, her old boss, and briefs her on the situation, requesting that she send a different agent to look into it. X asks why she can't just do it when she's already there, and she insists that she's retired and has a family now. She has no desire to let her past life drag them into needless danger, which is an internal struggle for her throughout the film. Lincoln expresses clear disappointment. This is their chance to be heroes, but Myrtle refutes, telling him that he doesn't understand what it means to be a real hero, and reaffirms that it isn't about the crazy gadgets and hype moments. It's about sacrifice, and making tough choices even if you don't like it. Which in this case is abandoning the vacation to protect your family. But once again, when you look at the big picture, what is normally a very good lesson becomes a major narrative flaw. Lincoln does know what it means to be a real hero and to take things seriously when the chips are down, and he has seen no shortage of sacrifices and tough choices, even in smaller scale situations like what we saw in Tricked. Hell, to some, the show is infamous for all the sacrifices he's had to make. And because of this, he ends up taking the mission behind Myrtle's back, which was reckless, don't get me wrong, but where his beliefs differ from Myrtle's. Heroes never back down from a mission. Nonetheless, it hurts to see him lie about taking Myrtle's words to heart, especially when she expresses how proud she is. But for now, we need to keep things moving along. Lincoln is about to head back to the hotel when Fifi calls him over. She found his camera on the beach while looking for sea glass, and she finds it cute that he wrote "Property of Lincoln Loud, Super Spy" on the back, like an enthusiastic and doting tourist would. Lincoln runs off to the hotel, feeling a little embarrassed, while Fifi embarrasses herself by falling into a hole Lucy dug. Upon arrival back at his really nice hotel room, he texts Clyde for assistance, who rushes home from a bike ride with his dads. Lincoln sends him one of the photos he took during the fishing trip and asks him to enhance it. They learn that the suspicious activity was tied to Rubiners, a fancy seafood restaurant on the island, so Lincoln decides to pursue it as his first lead on the mission. And this is pretty much the extent of Clyde's role in the film. He always seems to get the short end of the stick when it comes to screen time in the movies. The first one definitely gave him a more meaningful role, even if it was small. And while this one was a good chance to show off his book smarts, he's Lincoln's co-star in the rest of the David Steele stuff, so you'd think he would have been a more major player. Sadly, this isn't changing anytime soon. On the other side of the hotel, Myrtle's attempting to tell a showering Pop-Pop that they need to get out of Dodge, and catches Lincoln sneaking out of his room to pursue the mission. In the moment, she fakes exhaustion to get out of the dinner, and this is where things start to get a little weird. So this bellhop shows up with a gift basket, and Myrtle promises him a ton of money to pose as her for a bit and keep up appearances while she goes to find Lincoln. Things are going smoothly until the girls show up to whisk Myrtle away for the bachelorette party, and he has to stumble through the entirety of this very awkward subplot that the movie cuts back to periodically. It eventually connects back to the main plot at the end, but the unfortunate thing about this is that it effectively serves as just a storage bin for the rest of the family to give them something to do during the second act. There's no way to write them into the Lincoln and Myrtle main plot, but they're expected to be here because it's a Loud House movie. The first movie gave its primary focus on Lincoln and Angus, but managed to find meaningful or at least notable roles for Lucy, Lily, and Lenny. Though this subplot did give us Drunken Todd, who is definitely the unsung hero of this movie. We then jump on over to Rubiners, where Lincoln is devising a plan to get inside. His charisma doesn't work on the hostess, so he goes with plan B. Uproot a bush and several flowers, and pretend that this bouquet is from her boyfriend. The dumbass takes the bait, and Lincoln sneaks on inside, ordering a floppy at the bar. Fifi notices that he's at the restaurant and calls him over to enjoy dinner with her, the signature calamari safari, which doesn't contain any calamari. As Fifi yammers on about the wonderful world of car candles, Lincoln pulls out a listening device to try and sniff out clues, and catches a conversation between two henchmen who reference the cargo shorts minion from earlier. After Fifi's doting botches his stealth attempt, he gets a closer listen. Dufu is mentioned by name, and Hamhand is once again in cahoots. He searches the kitchen after the henchmen disperse, displaying a remarkable ability to teleport, but out of nowhere he is yanked into a nearby closet. The kidnapper is revealed to be Myrtle, who reprimands Lincoln both for lying to her and for taking the mission behind her back. Lincoln explains his findings and believes that the two of them can tackle this as a team, even when Myrtle's past has come back to haunt her. The henchmen spot them in the closet and recognize them from the incident on the boat, and a nice dinner quickly turns into a ballroom blitz. Myrtle takes on the henchmen, with Lincoln getting some clever shots in the mix, and the two decide that escape is the best option after their momentary victory. I really appreciate this joke about the scooters requiring an app to use, and how it's a piss taken how painfully often this happens with devices in real life. Like, why should I need my phone to set up a console? Why does a fucking washing machine need an app? I also have to take the time to appreciate how good the setting looks in the early evening. All of the glowing spotlights and vibrant colors make for some real eye candy. There's a reason why I chose this silhouette shot for the background. We also get to see both Lincoln and one of the henchmen accidentally tranquilize themselves, but sadly we are not treated to a hilarious acid trip sequence. The duo successfully escape into the jungle, only to end up in a bad collision. The wedding rings, which Lincoln was guarding even throughout the mission, are lost without anyone noticing. Myrtle urges Lincoln one last time to escape with his family, and within the bushes he has to witness her giving himself up to Hamhand and the henchmen, concluding the movie's second act. Just gotta take things one step at a time. Lincoln has a rough landing on the road, and by fortune runs into Flop's limo, his family still in tow. He tries to explain the situation to them, and they simply laugh it off, given that, as far as they know, Myrtle's with them. Confused by the ordeal, Lincoln passes a perception check and promptly exposes the bellhop, getting him booted from the plot. Lola's in complete disbelief that any of this is even happening. Lori gives Lynn and Pop Pop a call, and Flop beelines for the island police station. No idea why the main station is so small and shitty on what is a very big and populated island, but that's where the police chief resides. It's Flop. The comedic timing on this scene is phenomenal. Anyway, he was no help to absolutely nobody's surprise, and Pop Pop questions his ability as a fiancé for not being there to help her. Lincoln shows his accountability and tosses his bravado aside, and with a more than motivated Pop Pop standing with him, he rallies the family to action. And, of course, Lisa reprises her role as our David Steele gadget girl. Gotta love the enthusiasm. She converts the resort's business center into a field laboratory and prepares some high-tech gadgets for her family based on an analysis of a David Steele comic. This is the part they loved to show off in all the promotions. Lenny gets electric lipstick that can cut through metal, Lily gets a tranquilizer lollipop, Lori gets a pitching wedge that functions as a grappling hook, Lola gets explosive flower petals, Luann gets a whoopee cushion full of Lynn's gas, because we can't have nice things. Pop gets hydraulic brass knuckles, and Lincoln gets a durability upgrade to his David Steele watch with a built-in super magnet. Don't worry, Lynn Sr. gets a gadget too. Electric pepper shakers, so that he doesn't hurt anyone, including himself. Yep, this is what I've been afraid of, that the writers would eventually fall into the trap of making him act like the typical sitcom bumbling dad that needs to be parented by his wife, let alone his 5-year-old daughter. He's none the wiser that his gadget is basically just a toy. In fact, Lynn in general has it kind of rough in this film, getting hit with Lily's suitcase, getting sick on the plane, witnessing Lynn's gross underwear trick, and Pop-Pop's reluctance to eat dinner with him. Though half of the family didn't receive any gadgets whatsoever, and the pepper shakers do come in handy later on, so that balances that out a bit. Myrtle gets a brief scene depicting her imprisonment, where she laments that she'll never be able to escape her past and protect her family. Said family is heading into the jungle, following the tire tracks from the previous night's chase, and when that goes cold, Lana is able to continue the trail by scent. Lincoln pinpoints the location of Dufu's mountain lair, and prompts the family to hide when they spot some minions out surveying. Fifi shows up behind them and shows off the buggy she rented from the resort, which loudly blows their cover and prompts the family to hijack it. The family attempts to escape the situation with the minions in hot pursuit, and by a stroke of luck, they happen to fly right into the lair's secret garage. Lily successfully tricks a guard into tranquilizing himself, and his walkie-talkie reveals that there's only 10 minutes left until the big launch. Time is running short. Thankfully, the Louds happen upon a mall-style directory for the lair that shows them the way to its prison. It's hilarious that the lair has a Reiningers of all things. You'd think Lenny would have commented on this, though some things are much funnier as subtle visual gags. Lincoln accidentally activates a laser tripwire while giving the family some spy advice, and a security door comes down, forcing the two groups to split up. One Lynn attacks the henchman to steal his outfit, and the other Lynn gets to wear it as a disguise, and it just so happens to be the minion who's celebrating his birthday today. He accidentally saves the day with his pepper shakers, and then has to play it cool when more minions begin to flood the elevator on the way up, with half of his family stuffed inside his shirt. Eventually, something's gotta give, and Luann activates the whoopee cushion as the elevator nears its destination. Meanwhile, Lincoln's group is approaching a warehouse overpass, and Lenny uses her lipstick to cut the lights, while Lucy uses her better night vision to help them walk in a straight line. I'm gonna be honest, Lucy really got the short end of the stick this time around, especially when she was so important last time. This is basically the only meaningful thing she gets to do, and even that gets cut short when one of the minions finds a flashlight. Thankfully, Lori's grappling hook is able to save the day here, and while that's going down, Myrtle incites a plumbing failure in order to escape to the launch site. The two groups reconverge and discover Myrtle's now empty cell, and as a feeling of uneasiness creeps in, an alarm goes off, trapping the family inside. Myrtle enters the launch bay and attempts to disarm the rocket, and in a reprise of the intro, she throws hands with Ham Hand. While she comes out on top this time, she's also just in time to see her now trapped family being loaded onto the bottom of the rocket. Ham Hand restrains her in a moment of vulnerability, and the mastermind behind it all makes an entrance. And it's not Rufus Dufu, but actually... Fifi? What? Yeah, according to a flashback she gives, she was apparently Rufus's wife, who happened to walk in right as her husband was being ejected into space, and for 37 years assumed that Myrtle had done it on purpose. And when Myrtle refutes this, she is unwilling to listen. This is personal. Fifi wants vengeance for the events that transpired nearly 40 years ago. Launch Myrtle's family into space and make her watch. Make her feel what she felt. She claims to have been observing and formulating this plan for months, getting under Lincoln's skin in particular by telling him it was his spy antics that are about to get his family killed. Just an irresponsible child. Couldn't even take care of a couple of wedding rings. I'm gonna be honest, there's a lot to unpack here, both in terms of Lincoln's characterization and the execution of Fifi as a villain. The best way to start this off would be to compare her to Morag, our previous movie villain. You see a lot of people praise Fifi as one of, if not the show's best villain, while dumping on Morag for her writing execution. Now, she does have the better motive, that's without question, but overall, it was actually Morag that was the better executed villain. First of all, Morag nearly won. She was in control of her plan from start to finish, and it was ultimately her greed that did her in the end. Fifi's plan, on the other hand, had some serious holes, and she ultimately got extremely lucky. Her playing the fool behavior did nothing to benefit her setup. For example, blowing the family's stealth attempt only made things harder for her when they were already going where she wanted them to go, and if she wanted her wannabe spy to be an idiot and lure the rest of the family to her trap, then why would she have Ham Hand and the henchmen try and capture him during the second act? Did she account for the fact that another agent might have gotten sent to deal with her instead? How could she assure that Myrtle's phone got into Lincoln's hands? In addition, while both villains have their goofier moments, Morag was clearly shown to be the antagonist early on, so they could at least spend some time building her up, getting clear moments of scheming and manipulation to balance out the slapstick. Whereas Fifi's actual role in the story had to be kept secret, so she's loaded up on gags to the point where it's just too difficult to take her seriously when the big reveal comes along. Her eccentric behavior is written in line with the show's typical style of writing gag characters. In fact, her biggest issues stem from being a twist villain. One of the most important things to do when writing a good mystery is to leave little breadcrumbs here and there that create some sort of foreshadowing, subtly hint at a character not being what they seem, or that something's off about them. Something that allows one to potentially figure out the reveal before it happens, or provide a new way to look at the mystery and create some aha moments when experienced a second time. And this is Fifi's critical flaw. You can tell what they were trying to do, having Lincoln be in over his head and having Fifi vaguely egg him on about it while playing the fool to sell that manipulation. The Darth Jar Jar theory shows that this kind of thing can actually be very effective. She does blow his stealth attempts a couple of times, and Rufus does mention having a wife during the prologue, but the foreshadowing is next to non-existent, and this breaks everything. We're given no real reason to think that his wife is a supervillain, or that Fifi is that woman, and Fifi herself doesn't really do anything to hint that there's anything more to her than being the designated comic relief character. There are ways they could have done this. Have her be a more consistent presence that encourages Lincoln's bravado, so that her playing the fool has purpose. Or maybe have that dune buggy that she rides in be the same one that the minions use, so that perceptive viewers question why she has it. Or when she's babbling during the scene at Rubiner's, have her casually mention rocketry or being a fan of professional wrestling, listing Ham Hand as a particular favorite. And the latter example could work, since Ham Hand is introduced during the prologue. But they went on pure shock value instead. It all makes it difficult to convince the viewer that this is supposed to be some super calculated and manipulative mastermind, and this is why I was so underwhelmed when I first saw the reveal back in 2024. Everyone's collective what the fuck reaction says quite a lot. Even then, you have people cheering her on for giving Lincoln that wake-up call and for sticking it to him, quote-unquote. How much of that is pointless fandom vitriol is uncertain, but nonetheless, remember what Myrtle said to him on the plane, or on the beach after the fishing trip fiasco? Now it's not just words. But he already learned his lesson when he rallied his family, ditching the theatrics and short-sighted bravado and starting to take things seriously. So the so-called good points she makes end up becoming completely hollow and have little to no payoff. I will say though, it's at least an interesting and stark contrast to family bonding, where that bravado was ultimately rewarded instead of decried. And of course, this all comes back to the movie's fatal flaw, being a continuation of the character regression Lincoln has been experiencing since Season 7 began, making him selfish, stupid, and short-sighted, dragging his family into dangerous situations and having to have them bail him out. By contrast, the previous movie felt like the culmination of his character progression. Sure, he was retreading making the case there, but his characterization made much more sense when you looked at the big picture, whereas here, it makes less sense when you look at the big picture. A way to improve this would be to tie it into what Myrtle said to him on the plane, tie his stubbornness to his perseverance, wanting to prove to Myrtle that he's a worthy spy, even if he's biting off more than he can chew. That way, you can still have him learn from his mistakes, while simultaneously giving the audience a reason to root for him. Instead of being portrayed as immature and short-sighted, it'd be the more intelligent portrayal of being blinded by determination. If one of the sisters, aside from Lori, was in his shoes, I have a feeling that this is how the writers would have done it. Alright, that's enough yammering. Let's get back to the plot. Fifi starts the countdown and attempts to flee the island in a helicopter. Myrtle, still restrained, takes advantage of Ham-Hand's hubris by bringing up his bald spot, which allows her to break out of his restraint, with the ensuing scuffle resulting in him knocking himself out with a falling rock. This moment of peace gives Myrtle an opportunity to reassure her family, especially her fiancé, who is able to take a breather and show her a smile. Myrtle runs off to pursue Fifi, who's still waiting for her on the helipad, just for one last chance to get under her skin before heading off. The wedding rings are tossed right into the ocean, and a now enraged Myrtle makes an incredible leap to pull Fifi off of her helicopter and into a battle. The phone contains the controls to abort the launch, and after a brief scuffle to claim it, Fifi overshoots the edge of the platform, and Myrtle catches her. This little detail was a very clever parallel to the prologue. The villain's demise was by his or her own accident, and Myrtle tries to save them both. And this should have proven to Fifi that she was no killer, but blinded by hatred, she's willing to sacrifice herself and the phone to make her revenge a success. And that it seems to be. With the launch bay falling apart, Myrtle makes a mad dash to catch the rocket before it reaches the sky. And as everyone's freaking out, she makes her appearance. Pop-Pop's just happy to see her again, but she laments that despite this, there's likely no way out of their situation. Lincoln realizes the gravity of the situation and lets Fifi's words get under his skin, blaming himself for ruining the wedding and their lives, and in an upset panic, attempting to destroy his David Steele stuff. The entire family realizes that the situation is hopeless, but then Myrtle has a realization. The rocket has an empty septic tank that could be repurposed as an escape pod, and if sealed off, could provide just enough shielding to survive impact. But there's a problem. The tank has to be sealed from the outside. Someone isn't making it out alive. Both Lincoln and Myrtle insist on being the one to stay behind, and Myrtle laments her inability to escape her past. And as a result, she tells Pop-Pop she just cannot marry him, as it puts the family at risk. Pop-Pop doesn't want to leave Myrtle behind, but as they prepare for their fate, Lincoln wraps them in the grappling hook rope and uses the one charge on his super magnet to force them into the escape pod. He says goodbye to his family one last time and sends them on their way. Not only is he at least given the chance to make up for his mistakes, but he goes on to make the biggest sacrifice he's ever made. Thankfully, the escape pod lands safely on the beach and everyone is unharmed, but the reality sets in quickly. As far as they knew, Lincoln was dead. It really reinforces the idea that, despite all of the hell they put each other through in the past, they love each other to the end. The moment had some real emotional weight to it, even if you know that Nick isn't about to kill off one of their most popular characters. Myrtle picks up one of Lincoln's comics in memory, and has another realization. If they can take control of Lisa's space laser from the rocket console, they could smash a satellite into the rocket and spin its trajectory back towards Earth. And their one chance to save him was a rousing success, and Mr. Grouse gets to witness the raw power of a superweapon that a 5-year-old girl really should not have. The rocket's shielding takes some damage during re-entry, and while it lands safely in the ocean, it's starting to rapidly flood. While everyone looks on with uncertainty, it's Pop-Pop's time to shine, and his role in the film needs to be addressed. He's set up early on to have insecurities about his marriage, especially when his closest grandkid is giving a lot of his attention to the cool secret agent grandma instead. In fact, these and his attempts to impress are sprinkled in small doses throughout the movie, because he believes that he isn't good enough or exciting enough for Myrtle. But despite seeming like a promising arc for Pop-Pop that the film could run with, it becomes mostly an afterthought in the second act after he has his talk with Lynn, just to make a quick resurgence in the climax. Pop Pop feels like he's losing his edge, especially when the writers have been giving all those action grandpa moments to Leonard instead, which completely supplanted his niche. If they had at least given his arc some cutaway time in the second act, instead of focusing on that terrible subplot with the bellhop, it would have been much more developed and substantial. Furthermore, it would mirror the improvements we suggested for Lincoln's arc and create a running theme. Lincoln wants to prove that he's a worthy spy, Pop Pop wants to prove that he's a worthy husband, Myrtle wants to prove that she's worthy of having a real family. Either way, this scene is still one of Pop Pop's best moments, and the Curse of the Flying Hellfish energy is the icing on the cake. Gathering all of his strength, he punches open the glass and saves his grandson's life. How could that man ever think he was small potatoes? The family celebrates with a group hug, which Myrtle decides to abstain from. Lincoln invites her in, and even when she doubts herself one last time, he repeats Lisa's words that this family always sticks together, and even after all of that, they want her to be a part of it. She's really come a long way since Instagram, and when you hear how she's been feeling all these years, you can see why she wanted to dote on them so much. Back then, it was about accepting Myrtle into the family, and now it's about Myrtle accepting herself into the family. And that's exactly what she does. She's going to go through with marrying Pop Pop after all. Our wedding is back on. Cut to the preparations, and Lincoln pays a visit to Myrtle inside her cabana. She expresses how proud she is of Lincoln and how he stood up for his family. And he shows some real accountability during this heart-to-heart, having sold his David Steele watch in order to pay for a new set of rings, finally taking Myrtle's lessons to heart. The real mission has been accomplished. They chose you for a reason, buddy. Luna caps off the ceremony with a wonderful song, as Myrtle gets ready to throw the bouquet. For one thing I'll nitpick, I don't care if she's a tomboy, Lynn's wedding outfit looks terrible and honestly kinda sloppy. They could have done way better than this. But to give her some positivity, she had a running gag with Lori throughout the film where she was training her to make the big catch. And it's fun to see it all culminate in a heartwarming moment of payoff after all the slapstick. Then we get this awesome tropical dance party, and I honestly love myself a good dance party ending. Meanwhile, Flops managed to find and apprehend Fifi and Ham Hand, and they're gonna be locked up for a long time. Finally, Myrtle gathers her new family together for a group photo, and we cut to the credits. I love how similar it is to Super Mario Sunshine's credits, giving us a montage of photos from throughout the afterparty and the rest of their vacation. Tony the Henchman got to have his birthday party, which was a sweet gesture, and it looks like Myrtle did some serious mental damage to that bellhop. And of course, Drunken Todd fucking delivers yet again, this time with a reference to that one Soy Jack meme of all things. And topping it all off is a reprise of the family photo from before, and it all shows how heartfelt this movie can be, which is why it's a shame that it has these characterization issues and missed potential for some of their great ideas. The movie is really carried by the last 15 minutes or so, and all of the praises you see thrown this movie's way, all of those 10 out of 10s, typically pull their points from this part of the movie, from Fifi's motive to the payoff at the wedding. And it's resulted in the first movie being looked at unfavorably in retrospect, which is a little unfair. Hell, even the much more recent and much more controversial Naughty or Nice tends to get better treatment. There are things it did better and things it did worse, regardless of the differences in staff. And it feels like this film and the Casagrandes movie have a bit of a privileged status among the fandom. Like, people complain about the fantastical elements of the first film or the later seasons, when these two have rockets, international supervillains, and even demigods in metaphysical dimensions. Yet for whatever reason, people give a free pass to these two movies specifically, and I just don't get it. Now, I know I've been very critical of this film, and while I find the fandom discourse frustrating, I still think it's a very good movie. There's clearly a lot of love put into this, and it had a good direction going in. The destination wedding was well worth it. In fact, there's a lot of good ideas here, they simply just needed better execution. And with some corrections, this could have been a phenomenal rom. And you can't go wrong with a tropical island venue. Overall, it's still well worth the watch for any fan of the series. it's still earned a lot of that praise, and has cemented itself as a very worthy addition to the Loud House family. And that brings us to the end of yet another franchise milestone. With 2 films under its belt, it has a solid framework of what a Loud House movie should be going forward. It made good use of the production slots it was given, and its success kicked off these movies as a reoccurring thing for the future. How they'll use these opportunities is uncertain. But what did you think of the film and how it handled its big ideas? Did you adore it, or did you agree with all of my rambling complaints? Let me know in the comments, and keep your suitcases packed. The family is headed across the Atlantic.